Hi there. Welcome to Arts Bond. I'm so excited and happy to be working with you. Recorded in spring 2020, this video by myself, Jessa Aguilo, the founder and president and CEO of Arts Pond. This video is meant to be an introduction to the history, values, and kind of programmatic evolution of our company now that we're in our 6th season. Surprise, surprise. At our core, I think we see ourselves as a change maker of a different sort, trying to use the power of art to help boost healthy human ecosystems, both on the ground and in the cloud. We have many programs that we have been working on over the years, starting with Ground Story and Digital ASO, followed by Artsy United and I Lost My Gig Canada. I'll get into those programmatic details in a little bit, but just diving a little bit more into our values first, I think I see ourselves as looking at equity, justice, and trying to boost inclusion and empowerment of underserved, equity-seeking groups in arts and culture, looking at such systemic precarity issues as social inclusion, spatial precarity, spatial displacement, the lack of affordable, relevant, and inclusive housing and workspaces. So looking at gentrification and all its adverse effects, as well as economic inequality and economic precarity, as well as finally digital justice. Looking at digital and economic justice to start, in 2014, we started out as a grassroots organization. I, as the founder, launched a website, artspond.com, for the first time in 2014. And our dream scheme at that time was to establish something called a shared charitable platform, inspired by Tides Canada and Jane Marsland's paper on shared charitable organizations, which is what Tides Canada calls itself. Inspired by Tides' story, we endeavored to create Arts Pond as a shared charitable organization, essentially creating a charitable organization that shared its charitable structure and benefits, access to board governance and access to insurance and risk support, as well as artistic, creative, administrative, marketing, fundraising support to artists, either individuals or not-for-profits that do not have charitable status. By becoming a employee or an artist in residence of our charity, the idea was to allow them to gain access to Arts Pond's charitable programmatic efforts and to raise money that is tax receivable to support their programming. So the idea of this was quite exciting, so that the number of artists and organizations that needed to go through the rigmarole of becoming a charity was reduced. But the Canada Revenue Agency was quite resistant to this. We submitted a very detailed 160-page or so charity status application, a draft provisional one, prior to incorporation in 2015. And it was resoundingly denied with a 10-page rejection letter that basically said no, no, no on every page. And by 2016, we still had, after 3 years of work and almost no money raised, we had decided that we weren't going to give up on it completely, but we decided it was time to pivot and focus on some other things for a little bit and leave the idea, the prospect of creating a shared charitable platform, leave that for a little while. So we incorporated in 2016 as a federally incorporated not-for-profit in Toronto, the province of Ontario, in August of 2016. And the first thing that we started working on was a survey around digital justice and digital needs for small creators and producers in every culture discipline from across Canada, inviting them to respond to this survey, Managing Creativity in a Digital World. And it was bilingual, so in French, Gestion de la créativité dans un monde numérique. That survey was going to ask questions about if we created a brand new open source arts management software solution, what would your needs be? Looking to basically design a software solution that would allow us to address some of the precarity issues and concerns that the Canada Revenue Agency was having about shared charitable platforms. We thought if we could build a very robust information system, we could quickly and efficiently not only help reduce the economic precarity of artists by providing them with good information technology support so they could manage their data better and spend more time in the studio. But we could also, by capturing that information and working with them as a shared platform eventually, by capturing that data, we could better illustrate their artistic vitality, their public impact, and the efficiency and direction and control that we had in working with them as a member of our platform, which were the three primary elements that the Canada Revenue Agency was looking for in establishing a shared charitable platform. So we launched that survey not only because we thought there was a need for information, a better arts-specific information system in the sector, and wanted to figure out what the sector would need for that to look like, and to what it should look like for the sector, and how we might resolve some of the challenges around the lack of good information system software in the industry, but also to help us start thinking about software for eventually, hopefully, becoming a shared charitable platform with potentially hundreds of artists working with us. So we had $0 at that time, and we implemented a national survey with a zero budget. And so that survey was launched in January of 2017, and the results were available by the spring of that year. And it was actually the results of that survey that made us realize that we as an organization and the industry overall weren't actually quite ready yet to dive into software development. We did use the results of that survey to try to get some money to develop software, but there weren't, in the early days, in 2017, 2018, really any takers. We put in probably half a dozen or a dozen grant applications, including some very large ones to Google and others, and they just weren't successful. So we did a little bit of a pivot, and using the results of that survey as backup, we submitted a grant application to do a mini conference, a 3-day conference, 1.5 days, 2 days in Toronto and a day in Ottawa. And that was called the Digital Arts Services Symposium. And we did it on a very small budget of $7,500 of public money and the remainder in kind and ticket sales for a total budget of $18,000. And that was really just a pilot project to see, is there a need for something called a digital ASO type organization? ASO being art services organizations. ASOs are quite well established in the industry, providing things like education, workshops, professional development, advocacy for better public sector support of their discipline, or networking, and advocating for fee standards. Those are the kinds of things that ASOs, or art service organizations, have traditionally undertaken since they started emerging in the field about 20 years ago. And there's even a charitable status called National Arts Services Organizations, or NASOs, and there's about 24 of them, I believe, or 30 or so across Canada. Most ASOs and the NASOs are focused in a region or nationally, in the case of the NASOs, and they're also focused in a discipline. And what was new for us was to look at becoming an ASO that focused Nationally, yes, but also every discipline. And there aren't any that I know of that do that currently. And thirdly, that we wanted to look at, not just traditional kinds of ASO type programming, but digital programming and digital innovation. So asking the question, what does a digital ASO look like? Or a DASO? Does a digital art service oriented organization offer new kinds of programming and new kinds of innovations looking at what technology can do? Or does it just try to improve what traditional ASOs do with better efficiency and impact on the community? I think it's actually the answer is it's a bit of both. It's not one or the other. But that was the initial purpose of the first symposium in 2017, was to kind of bring the sector together and ask that question. So what is a DASO? Do we need them? Are they different from ASOs and NASOs? In 2019, we were able to do a second edition as a much larger 6-day conference with triple the attendance and more than triple the budget, thanks to the launch of the Digital Strategy Fund in 2018 at Council for the Arts. And we also got, in 2019, we also got another Digital Strategy Fund project, not the $110,500 that we got for the DASAN, for the Digital Art Services Symposium 2019, but for a new project called Hatch Open and Artsy United, we got up to $495,000 from that fund for a multi-phase project. Hatch Open is, in essence, the software platform that we started scoping back in 2014, or it's evolved into that. So it's going to offer eventually financial management, project management, CRM or client relationship, constituency relationship management, team and asset management, and other kinds of modules. The primary scope of Hatch is actually to help users and help the industry understand and illustrate their impact so that they can attract greater investment, looking at social finance and looking at public funding also, but they can better tell their story, better illustrate the high artistic quality and high public impact of their work to try to attract greater social investing and greater public investing in their artistic activities. And it's this idea of facilitating a relationship, an increased relationship with a community of donors and public grantees that Artsy United is kind of starting with. Artsy United is a separate organization that will use the Hatch open source arts management software to help facilitate that dialogue between an artist and their supporters and their audiences and their collaborators, their partners, their other artists that they want to work with. As a platform co-op, Artsy United will be owned and governed by its users, including artists, including funders and donors, including audiences. The idea is that using the Hatch Open software to facilitate these kinds of conversations and dialogues, Artsy United will become a revenue generator and a relationship sustainer amongst artists, audiences, advocates, and their administrators as a community, as a co-op, where revenue generated by the platform itself is then disseminated and shared with all its users, all its members. Then in 2020, we got our third Digital Strategy Fund project up to yet another $495,000 to do a research project that we're calling Digital ASO Phase 2. We actually had launched Digital ASO back in 2016 as an overall name brand for all of our research and literacy and platform building work. So Digital ASO is a name brand for the Managing Creativity in Digital World survey. It's a name brand for DAS 17 and DASAN 19. So digitalaso.ca holds all of this action. Hatch Open and Artsy United originally used to be under Digital ASO, but they've become their own thing now, just for clarity. So the Digital ASO Phase 1 incorporated all that research and the two conferences. Digital ASO Phase 2 focuses on a new project, a new national project, asking what would a digital strategy for shared transformation of arts and culture, creative industries, heritage, tourism, and other related industries look like that is community-led and not funder-led. We've experienced many challenges in getting our digital initiatives off the ground. And we feel like we've been probably forced to go through many challenges that many other people in the sector have also gone through in trying to get their digital programs off the ground. And then there's those that aren't even prepared to go digital yet, and they don't know where to start thinking about how they might enter a digital space and start innovating. And so this project, Digital ASO Phase 2, is going to basically look at that question nationally and regionally and see if we can come up with a shared national strategy that can be stewarded by what we're calling DASA, the Digital Arts Services Alliance. And the Alliance will kind of look at the issue of digital transformation long term and the strategy that's been recommended through the research that we're doing, and making sure that we are, as a nation and as an arts and culture industry, that we are making good steps forward and not too many steps back on addressing the digital transformation needs of the whole sector, with a focus on equity-seeking groups like Black and Indigenous, New Canadians, youth, women, disability arts people, and other kinds of racialized and equity-seeking groups. Our hope is that all of this work will culminate in a new program after Digital ASO Phase 2 is completed in 2022, called Together There. Together There is meant to become a pillar program with maybe up to $5 million for a 2 to 3 year timeline, and really is meant to take Digital ASO and Hatch Open and Artsy United's desire to support literacy, innovation, platform building, and collaboration and networking, and unite that all into one program that has multi-year investment in communities across the country around digital, but also spatial justice issues, which I'm going to get to in our next slide. The need for a national innovation ecosystem that looks at systemic issues in the sector is really, really strong. We, as a sector, as an arts and culture, heritage, creative industries, tourism sector, we are too isolated by our regional and disciplinary silos, and we need to collaborate systemically in a sustainable way and in a deeply different kind of way. We need to challenge the status quo, and that is the focus of Together There, is to reposition those silos into a more collective, collaborative community for shared intentional impact. And we can talk more about collective impact, a field of activity from the social innovation field, in another video. But for now, let's get on to our next slide and spatial justice questions. But actually, before I do that, my bad, would just like to mention what's happening right now at the time of this video recording in spring 2020. This is when the pandemic has really taken hold. And we decided, as a result of the pandemic and the real serious risk to the arts and culture community, that we couldn't just stand by and continue to work on these programs while we've been working on them with good intent for the last 6 years, and they do and will serve a positive, will serve and provide a positive contribution to the arts and culture community, we feel, and we're not abandoning them. We felt the urgency of the pandemic required a different kind of thinking, at least temporarily. And so we pivoted and delayed our work on the launch of Digital ASO, and we delayed our ongoing work on the Hatch Open and Artsy United project to work on 2 programs called COVID-19 Response and I Lost My Gig Canada. COVID-19 Response is a task force trying to unite national collaboration and national sharing around data, research, mitigation, advocacy communications, and fundraising support to bring the sector together around learning and responding to the challenges of the pandemic in the arts and culture community across Canada. There were, in the spring of this year and in the winter, when it first started happening in March of 2020, there were a lot of surveys, for example, starting to come out in different disciplines and different regions. And I was worried about survey burnout. So the task force, just under the shared data working group, is looking at how can we have some standardized questions. If we're going to have many surveys, can we have some standardized questions that every survey can use? Then we can advocate for bringing all the data, collecting all the data into one database, because there's shared questions, and as a result have a much bigger data set to better understand the scope of the impact and the effectiveness of solutions being activated or proposed in the community as a result. So there was a task force looking at that as a strategic issue nationally. Then I Lost My Gig was launched at the same time also as our response with our own surveys looking at small creators and producers, individuals in the arts, culture, heritage, creative industries, tourism, and other sectors where gig workers were very badly impacted in the early days of the pandemic. So there's more to that to come, for sure. So moving on now, now's the right time to talk about spatial justice. And we have some mentoring that I'd like to mention also. So we talked about the values and the vision at the very beginning of this presentation, and talked about digital and spatial justice. And really everything that we're working on is between those two things. Those are the 2 core issues that we're really interested in. We started with economic justice with the shared charitable platform, but the pivot was towards spatial and digital justice as 2 strong issues in the sector that can encompass economic justice as well as many other issues. So actually economic justice was the first step, but we realized it was also just not deep enough in terms of the systemic issues in the sector that needed to be addressed. Yes, economic justice was one of them, but economic precarity was coming because of, largely in the sector, because of the shift to the gig economy, which is a digital justice issue, and increasingly gentrification and its impacts with the lack of affordable, appropriate, accessible housing and workspaces. So economic justice is a part of both of those elements, but wasn't the core underlying one. So the spatial justice issue came from the fact that I, as the founder, was living in the Artscape Triangle Lofts on the west side of Toronto, off of Queen, which was one of the most rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods, the second most, I believe, by a study from the Toronto Star, the second most rapidly gentrifying neighborhood in Toronto in 2017 and 2018. So I thought, well, if I'm looking at a digital justice and now I'm in the most rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, I should look at spatial issues as well and see if I can respond. And so I came up with this program name called Ground Story, or in French, Histoire de Train. and was very lucky to get some funding from the Collective Impact program at the Ontario Trillium Foundation for phase 1 research, and also got some funding from Canada Council for the Arts to do a pilot project to engage community stakeholders in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area to do a very detailed international literature review and to do some podcasts and some other kinds of literacy work that will culminate in our literacy report called Wet Space later this year in the fall probably of 2020. All the research from the Ground Story Phase 1 work will result in this report called Wet Space. And really, it's the Ground Story program. We've struggled to find some more money to keep this program going because it's a really complex issue and requires a lot of work. But we have proposed for Phase 2 a program called Ground Trust. We're hoping to find $150,000 in seed money by 2021 to start that literacy program. And really where that's what's underlying that is the research from the Ground Story Phase 1 realized that one of the best solutions to address gentrification and spatial precarity in the arts and culture sector is social purpose real estate. And one version of social purpose real estate that we're particularly interested in is community land trusts. Community land trusts buy up land or buy up property and permanently take it off of the market. So there's no speculation on that property or land in the future. And it's owned and governed by the community. They get to decide how that land or property is used. So if it's a brand new property, you could develop some social purpose real estate like a housing co-op or a rent to own, or you could develop a community garden. And so we've decided that we need to create some literacy toolkits as a first step to educate the community about what these social purpose real estate options are, and in particular community land trusts, and how they can be activated. And then after this phase, we would like to then actually try to build some ourselves. So hopefully that will happen sooner than later. We have some work to do to make that happen for sure. The last pension I would mention in terms of what's been happening since 2016 is a mentorship program. And we kind of have two names for them: AHA Essentials for Artist Producers and Ask Anything. And really, it's just the idea that I'm trying to mentor as many people as I can as the founder of Arts Pond. And in my 30th year, working more than 32 years now, I think, working in arts and culture, I want to share to the next generation, share my knowledge. So I've been mentoring students from various programs, undergrad and postgraduate programs, such as the Humber College program, University of Toronto, or Ryerson University programs in arts and culture management, in creative industries, and in urban planning. And that's this. So this mentorship program is something that I would like to continue on permanently, and hopefully find some funding so we can pay people to participate in the mentorship themselves. And that's it for now. Stay tuned for another video in the coming days with updates. Hopefully that was helpful, and I look forward to working with you in the coming days.